WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Representative Tip McGuire of Kenosha is the Democratic incumbent candidate for the 64th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Representative McGuire, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for participating in our candidate interviews. I'll start by asking you, what's your campaign's key message? Why are you running for re-election?
Well, the reason I ran for office in the first place and the reason that I continue to run for office is that I'd like to make sure that we're building a path to economic security for working people and the middle class.
So if you're reelected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you to introduce?
Well, I think there's a number of critical challenges. The challenges change from term to term, but there's a couple of things that I'm very concerned about, one of which is the tremendous workforce shortage that not only we have as a state, but also in particular in key parts of our sort of public services that we offer. We're struggling to hire teachers, we're struggling to hire police officers, we're struggling to make sure that those critical positions are filled, and so I think we have to do a lot of work to make sure we have the workers that we need.
What does that legislation look like then?
Well, I think that it's important to try and attract people to these professions. I think one of the critical issues that we've had in a lot of municipalities is a struggle with their budget, something that we helped with shared revenue this past session, so that they could be able to afford to pay police officers and firefighters and other public servants. School districts have similar challenges. I think that we need to be restoring money to these institutions to ensure that they can hire the people that they need to fill those positions. But we also have to prioritize for people the choice to go into that profession in the first place. Both of those, I think, are positions that at times are heavily criticized publicly, and at times obviously have more scrutiny attached to them, but we have to make sure that people feel comfortable entering those roles because they're so vital to the success of our state.
So if you're reelected, you're entering in a biennial budget year and the state has more than a $3 billion projected surplus. What would be your top two priorities for use of that surplus funding? Yeah,
I think given where we are as a state right now, I think it would be hard-pressed to not list public education as one of those. I think that's just going to continue to be an important place for us to put our money. In particular because, as we noted during the conversations of the budget this year, Wisconsin is in many ways an aging state. And so if we're going to continue to grow our economy long term and make sure people have economic opportunity in Wisconsin, we're going to have to make sure that we have workers who want to stay here and be here. And one of the ways that we do that is attracting people through good schools. It's making sure that people who come here to work have access to affordable child care, making sure that people can afford to go to the doctor and buy a house, have affordable housing. And so I think all of those kind of meld into one, that we have to make Wisconsin a more attractive state for people to want to come and live in. I love Wisconsin. I think it's a very attractive place to live in. But when people are looking across the country at places that will provide them with the opportunities, I don't know that they first think of Wisconsin, and we can change that certainly.
What about tax cuts or tax reform? Where does that land in your campaign's priority and platform?
Yeah, well, I think that there's, especially with the surplus, there's certainly room to return money to people. But I think that, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach that maybe can help address some of those problems. So, for example, one of the ways that Assembly Democrats introduced this session was to provide sort of a property tax credit, a sizable property tax credit to people who are paying significantly more in their property tax department than in comparison with their earnings. And that way can help not only provide tax relief to middle class and seniors who are in housing and make sure that they can still afford things during a difficult time, but also to help begin to address some of the affordability problems that we have with housing in general.
You've mentioned education, K-12 education, obviously a leading issue for many voters. What do you think is working well in education and what really needs to change?
Well, I think, one of the problems that we have with education is that we have yet to see any marked success, at least from my perspective, from having two separate educational systems. And so I think one of the things that we're failing to do is provide sufficient resources in our public schools to be able to allow them to succeed, and to provide teachers with the flexibility to teach the students that they have in their class and to address the problems that those kids have. I would, as always, I would like to see smaller class sizes as a general rule. I think the closer we can get to one-on-one instruction, and I know that's impossible, and I'm not advocating for a one teacher per student, but the closer that we can get to that, the better instruction will be naturally.
What about higher education, the state system of four-year colleges, two-year colleges, technical colleges? What does that future of that system look like to you, and where should the legislature focus? Well,
I think that the university system is in a place of peril, frankly. Since the day I was born in Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin system has been the pride of the state. It is something I think that most Wisconsinites trust and have faith in these institutions. We believe that they are great places for our kids to go if they so choose. And yet we have not been providing them with the resources to even be considered middle of the pack in the country in terms of higher education resources. And gratefully, we have such strong institutions with strong reputation that we're still able to attract good faculty and good teachers. But that won't last forever if we continue to undercut their ability to do their jobs and frankly, to have the resources they need to provide students with excellent education.
So you support a full increase of funding for the Universities of Wisconsin system?
Well, I think that we're going to have to weigh and balance an awful lot of things, and so I'll say I support an increase in funding for the University of Wisconsin system.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address it?
Well, I think there's a number of challenges here, and like I alluded to at the beginning, one of the biggest ones is simply getting people to, the fact that we're aging as a state, and yet we have a growing economy, which is great. That's a good thing. But we aren't able to take full advantage of that because we are aging, and so we don't have as many people who are able to be in the workforce now as a percentage of the population than in the past. And so we have to make this an attractive place for young families to be. We have to make this an attractive place for young people to be. And so to do that, I think that we have to make sure that we're offering the types of things that help working people succeed, like childcare. And then once we start talking about childcare and elder care, you think, well, boy, these are industries where the wages are very low, and it isn't. A lot of the people that work in those can transition to other jobs that are higher paid, and so we really struggle to maintain a workforce there to even be able to help supply our workforce for other industries. And so I think that there's a lot of a whole series of connected challenges that we have to fix.
I have a few more workforce questions for
you.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Yeah, as with anything, I would say, the devil is always in the details, so I'd have to see what the proposal looks like. But I think that could certainly make sense, yeah.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
Yes, I am aware of this issue. I know that Representative Sinicki had put out several pieces of legislation that came out of the governor's misclassification task force. I wrote an op-ed about it a while back, and I know I had spoken with former DOR Secretary Peter Barca about a lot of the tax dodge issues. I think there's a whole host of problems with the practice as it currently exists. Not only does it make work environments far worse for the men and women who are working there and who are underpaid and have bad work environments, but it also undercuts good work environments. And so if you think about the kind of state we want to be, a place where working people can get ahead, people can work hard, make money, buy a home, send their kids to schools, it really harms those opportunities for the people who are doing the right thing and good employers. And so I think that there's a lot of work that has to be done on this.
You have talked about affordable housing. Affordable rental housing is also an issue in Wisconsin, and some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. Tell me more about your sense of housing as an issue, and what do you think best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control or building more rentals, or what are the solutions there?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges, price increases from my Econ 101 class in college, right, is that it's too much demand chasing too few goods is almost exactly the problem that we have in housing right now, which is that we have a lot of people who need places to live, and unfortunately, we have not been able to keep up with demand for many years. So we're many units behind in developing. And I'm glad to see that we were able to put money into it earlier this year. Unfortunately, I can't claim that that's going to be, some monumental change. It helps, but there's a lot of work that has to go into making this more possible. And so a couple of things that may be essential is, making it easier to develop more flexible housing options, I should say. So, duplexes or things like that kind of round out the middle of the housing market, as well as providing people with additional ways of being able to finance purchasing a home, and then of course obviously working with WIDA to help make sure that we're developing new affordable housing, and particularly apartments and things like that.
Moving on to healthcare.
Yeah.
Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
Well, I do think that we have to look at the reimbursement rates. I think that's an important place.
Increase them?
Yeah, I would think that would. Yeah, I don't think that there's any space to decrease them at this point. I think that's a main challenge for a lot of the hospital systems that are primarily taking Medicaid patients. So I think that would be one place we'd have to look at it, especially if we're going to accept federal Medicaid dollars, which is something I believe we should do. I think that making sure that people can go to the doctor is a pretty basic, simple proposition, and something that we should be able to invest in, especially when the feds are helping support that. So the combination of those two things, I would think would be my first steps.
Mental health care is also a growing concern for many Wisconsinites, a concern for state and county budgets. What are you hearing on this issue in your district, and what are some solutions? Yeah,
I think that people are very concerned about mental health care and making sure. I think, frankly, it's a national problem, and I think we've been through a lot, frankly, as a country. I would say I see that we have a lot of challenges, and we've had very stressful recent years, and so I think a lot of people are struggling. But I think that from my perspective, the number one approach is to start when people are young and help them get the resources they need, so that, if I'm being totally, my perspective on this is partially informed by the fact that I was an assistant district attorney, and there were a lot of people that come into your courtroom when you're prosecuting cases who probably struggle with some form of with some mental health challenges. And a lot of times it's been unaddressed for far too long. And so people begin to mask these things, whether it be with substance abuse or with other activities. And so I think the younger you can start, the earlier you can have interventions where people can understand what they're going through and get whatever necessary treatment they need.
Does that mean more resources in schools or more?
That's exactly what it means, yes. I was going to get there, is that we know there's one place where all kids go, and it's their school. And so we should try and go there and make sure that we have as universal care for mental health as we can.
How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
I believe in a woman's right to choose.
Any number of week limits on abortion access in Wisconsin?
I think that we should be restoring Roe v. Wade.
What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed, and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of our aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Yeah, so I've been pleased with the efforts of the Department of Transportation to make sure that the Kenosha area, our county roads, our state roads, are doing well. I do know that as local municipalities have been struggling with dollars, they've been pushing off some of the road construction that they need to do and the road repair that they need to do. And so that's provided, I think, a little bit of a challenge with some of our major streets within the cities and villages in my community. And so that's one of my concerns, is making sure that our cities and villages have the funds they need to do their roads properly.
PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
Yes, I see it as an important issue, and I think the first easiest step is to release the $100 million that we've already allocated to combat this.
How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
Well, I'll say this. I was born and raised in Kenosha. I was born and raised in Summers, which is right outside Kenosha. And I've lived here the majority of my life. My family is deeply embedded in the community. I care about it. It's where my friends are. It's where my neighbors are. It's where I consider home. And it's always been where I've considered home. And so, with a lifetime of service that I've provided to Kenosha, I worked for my predecessor, Peter Barca. I've sat on the National Alliance for Mental Illness Board in Kenosha. I've been on the Kenosha Library Foundation Board. I was a prosecutor in Kenosha. I simply believe that I'm the most qualified for this position because I've shown how much I care about Kenosha and the people that live there.
Final question. Let's say you're reelected. You get this magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties, all people together. What is the issue?
One issue, magic wand. Wow.
Best question.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's too many, isn't there? I think for the challenges that our state is facing right now, I guess I would say workforce is probably at the top of the pile, because I think it really impacts a lot of people's opportunities. But I'd say, I guess if I'm just picking anything historically, I think that people need to get paid more as a general rule in this country. I think that we need to be working on long-term, making sure that wages match the output that people have.
All right. Thank you, Representative Tip McGuire of Kenosha, the Democratic incumbent candidate for the 64th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Representative Tip McGuire, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.